Hi guys and welcome back. So today I'm going to show you how to tear down those forks on the front of your Suzuki VS1400 Intruder, and in part 2 I'll show you how to rebuild them, install new fork seals, etc., and reinstall them onto the bike. So let's get into it. Okay, so as you can see here, this fork is still in the triple tree. I've taken the cap off. Now if you need to reference on how to do any of this, there is videos on the channel showing you how to take the front end off, how to reinstall the front end, etc. But for those of you that have already seen these videos, you'll know that this is a 14mm Allen. So we've got a long Allen wrench there. And all I want to do is crack this inner nut free. I don't want to take it out while it's in this position. I just want to crack it free. So I'm going to give it a tap with a hammer. There we are. Leave it like that. Do not continue to undo it. There is something we need to do first before we take this out. Underneath this nut here, there is a long spring that goes all the way down the length of the tube, and right now it is under compression. If we start taking this nut out without taking proper precautions, that nut is going to fly straight out at you. Let's not have that happen. So we're now going to undo the lower triple tree nut here, and we're going to remove the fork and put it on the bench. Okay guys, so inside of here we have a nut and a bolt that we need to undo before we take anything else apart. And the reason I want to do that is because at the moment the fork is under compression. This nut that's inside here is attached to what's called the damper rod, which sits inside the lower fork. But the problem with it is, as soon as you remove the compression in the fork, unless you've got the right tools, this rod, when you try to undo it, will just spin on the inside. So what we need to do is just crack that lower nut free, lower bolt, while everything is still under compression. The bolt inside here is a 6mm Allen. Get yourself a long set of these. If you haven't got a long set of Allens, you really should, because it's really going to save you a lot of time in the future. What I like to do before I pin down the fork, which we're going to need to do in a minute, is I'm just going to throw this onto this impact driver. But what I do want to do is just provide a bit of shock to it so I can get it out easier by hand in a moment. Ideally you want to clamp this down to the bench. A vise is a great idea. Just make sure you're using soft jaws. This is all aluminium, so it is very, very soft stuff. 6mm Allen. Find the nut there. And I just want to crack it off. I don't want to undo it all the way. We're going to do one quick sharp blast or push, and hopefully we should hear it crack free. There we go. So now the nut that's sitting inside here is loose. I'm not going to keep trying to undo it because at this point it won't come free, and this is filled with oil. Okay folks, so I've brought the fork down onto the floor, and as you can see, we've got to get this nut out. If you can, don't undo this nut down here on the floor where your head is higher than the nut. If you can put it on a bench, great. If not, grab yourself a towel, wrap it around the fork, and then start to undo it, holding the towel down on top of the fork. That way, if anything shoots up, you're catching it in the towel or the rag, whatever you might use, and you can still get a grip on the fork. So as you can see, I'm standing off to one side, trying to keep the fork away from me as much as possible, because I don't really want a face full of aluminium today. There we go. And there we have it. There's your cap, and there's the start of your spring. Now don't forget, this is filled with fluid right now, so we need to get rid of it, and then we can get it on the bench and start taking everything apart. Okay guys, so if you've owned a Suzuki VS1400 for longer than a month, chances are you've come across these chrome covers. Now they are particularly fiddly to remove, but it's not difficult. You just have to have a bit of patience. You will need a very fine flathead screwdriver, and you can go ahead and get yourself a standard flathead screwdriver as well. And all you have to do to remove these covers, it's really tempting to start here where this cutout is, and in fact if you were to look in the manual, it even tells you to start here. Don't do that. start next to it. So I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to make sure that it's bumped up against the wall so the fork's not going to be going anywhere. And I'm going to put pressure using the screwdriver on that seal, hammer on the other end, and I'm just going to tap twice, rotate the fork, go about half an inch further around, 2 taps, rotate the fork, tap tap, rotate the fork, and I'm just going to keep doing this. There you are, you can see how it's coming out already. Now that we've got some spacing there, we can switch to our bigger screwdriver and go around and do the same thing. And there we are. So people always freak out about these chrome covers, like, oh my God, how do we get them off? It's really not that difficult, guys. Now, we've definitely got some lovely looking goop in here, like so. And let's have a look. Oh yeah. So the next step, folks, is to separate this pole from the lower fork. Okay, so the next step is to finish unscrewing this bolt down here. Before we can actually disassemble the fork, we need to remove the damper rod bolt down the bottom. Now remember I said how if we were to just to try and undo this now, it would just rotate? Well, that's what it does. No matter how much you spin it, that nut will just keep spinning, keep spinning, keep spinning, keep spinning, keep spinning, and it will not come out. Chances are it will not. So what we have to do, we have to stop the damper rod on the inside of the fork from rotating. That way we can get leverage on this bottom nut. Now you can get special tools that fit down in this fork and into the end of the damper rod. You'll also find on most conventional forks that the damper rod has a hex or Allen end to it. That is not the case on these forks. So ladies and gents, this is your damper rod. This sits on the inside of the fork, and on the other side it's just a circle. Like I said, on a lot of them they'll be Allen shaped, and you can actually get a nut or a bolt head of some sort down into the fork to sit into here so that you can get leverage on it. That's not the case here. The only saving grace that we have with this particular fork design is that this tube is tapered. It gets smaller, gets narrower near the end. So a dowel, a long dowel would do the trick, and quite possibly a broomstick. I'm not recommending that you do it. I'm going to be actually using a pull cue to do it, an old pull cue. And that pull cue is going to go down the length of the fork. It's going to come down into the damper rod. I should have enough torque there to remove the nut off the end, the bolt out of the end. Putting everything back together is a different game. We'll get to that in part 2. But for now, if you just need to strip everything down, this is not a bad way to go. Let's do it. Like I said, I'm going to be using a pull cue. They're nice and clean, they're varnished, so no splinters are going to come off. And they sit perfectly inside that rod. So, I'm going to pop that down to the very bottom. Okay, like so. Put that in this end here. Move it down so you guys can see. I'm going to hold on to the cue, and I'm just going to undo and push. And there we are. See how the bolt came straight out? It's just because we stopped that rod from rotating. Okay, so now that we've got the seal cover off here, the dust cap and the metal cap, we can start taking apart the entire fork. We've removed the bolt at the end, we've removed the cap at the top, and we've emptied the oil. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the spring. So now that the spring's been removed, we need to remove the circlip or retaining clip on the inside of the fork. So I'm going to bring this up, and I'm hoping that you will be able to see, and I'm hoping the camera is in focus for you. You should be able to see this metal clip here. Goes all the way around the fork, and it's sprung loaded. You see if we can get in there and have a look. There we are. See how that's sprung loaded? It is split down the middle, so we need to remove this and get a flathead screwdriver in there. And just always remember to not stab your fork at any point. There we go. See how that popped up? Okay, we can take that off, keep that safe. And inside here we've got your seal. This is what we're trying to replace. Now we can separate the forks, extend the fork as far as it will go, grab one end and pump them and give that a slam or two. There we go. And the fork will separate. So now this can be put to one side for a moment and we can have a quick look at the top of the fork. Here are the internals of your fork. We have our seal, and we have a washer, we have a number 1 bush and number 2 bushing. There is a seat for this one down here. This will not move up and down on the fork. So if you ever need to replace this, just remember that it sits inside this groove down here. This one can be removed, but just remember that this is the orientation that they need to go. And we can slide that off the end of the pipe. Now we can move that to one side because we don't need this for the moment. And we can take a look at the lower fork. You will notice one or two things about the fork on the inside. So this is where your damper rod sits, okay? Your damper rod, the end of your damper rod sits inside here. So your damper rod lives inside the fork, the main fork, and that's what it looks like. We've got a rebound spring here. It's important that this does go on when you put everything back together. If this is damaged, you really should get this replaced. And you'll notice the inside of the damper rod, the end there, you can see the thread. Well, that's what that bolt goes into. So we've got our lower fork, which can go here. Our damper rod, when it's inside the top tube, would sit here, like so. The end of the damper rod would sit inside that casing, like so. And then that bolt goes in from the bottom of the fork and connects into the damper rod, like so. And that's it. This is your rebound. So that sits on the conical edge there. Now we've taken all the pieces off of the fork, we can start cleaning things if we need to clean them. We can start replacing things if we need to replace them, such as washers and whatnot. But of course, the main thing that we wanted to do was replace this seal. Before we replace this seal, it really is worth, ladies and gents, going and grabbing yourself a seal driver. The amount of times I see people taking a new seal, like so, and imagine this is all put back together properly. They put the seal in, like so, but they can't get it all the way down because there's a pipe in the way, and you have to make sure that you seat this correctly. So many of my friends, they take flathead screwdrivers while this fork tube is still in place, and they put it up against the seal and then start smacking it with a hammer just to drive it down. And then in 6 months' time they have to replace it because they've perished this already. They've started the process of this deteriorating by hitting it with a flathead screwdriver. Please don't do that. It's not worth it. This seal driver, they're not expensive anymore, ladies and gents. This was £25. It's not expensive. It's so simple to use. It fits up to, I believe, 50mm tubes. And in a minute, I'll show you how to use it. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to polish everything up, clean it as much as I can, degrease as much as I can. We also need to take note that we need fluid in the lower fork, so we need to rebuild this before we can put fluid in the lower fork. Don't forget, guys, that if you need to know how to install these forks into the triple tree, you can go ahead and click on this video up here. Or if you want to watch more VS1400 Intruder content, you can click on this video down here and follow along with the rest of the project. For now, guys, take care of yourselves and I'll see you soon.